This is the circular flower. This one is a little larger, this is a little smaller. So to give you an idea for the demonstration, this is going to be a 3-inch wide strip that is 18 inches long, and this one is going to be a 2-inch wide strip that is 12 inches long. So using ribbon width, which we'll talk about a little more when we get into the demonstration, it'll enable you to scale the flower up and down as desired. Now that we have this theme, I want to show you a variation. A variation of that circular flower, and some variations on this, but you'll get to see that later. This is the lesson. We have plenty of work to do, so let's get busy. This all starts with materials and tools. We have strip of fabric. The width and the length I'll talk about later. You could also substitute ribbon for this, plus a ruler to measure the lengths. Also, if you're using a strip of fabric and you want to finish the edges, fray check is always a good idea. Then, since this is hand sewing, we have scissors, we have needles, we have thread, and also some disappearing chalk. You'd like disappearing chalk, or you can use the disappearing markers, because you're going to need to mark the fabric for the creasing to prepare the strips for the flowers. Now, we have one more tool that I'm going to bring in, and it's called the stencil cutter. This is a tool called a stencil cutter. What you see here is a heat tool. So the little point gets hot. It's sort of like a wood burning tool. And we're going to use this if we want to cut through man-made fibers like nylon, polyester. It doesn't work well on rayon because that's a cellulose fiber. We also have a sheet of glass, and the point here is you use the stencil cutter and you cut against the glass so that you don't end up actually welding your fabric to the cutting mat. So I'm going to show you next how this is used. Now, this is a piece of our fabric. You notice here that I have drawn chalk lines. These will disappear when you press. This is 3 inches wide, but this is a polyester fabric. So let me just zoom in a little bit here. So the object here is you take the point and you cut right across. It's like butter. And so then you get an edge. You can see the little glint on the edge. You get an edge that is completely sealed so it doesn't unravel. So let me just, I'm going to cut a little bit of this edge here so you can get a sense here. So I'm going to cut most of this off camera, but I just want to show you here. You could use a metal ruler if you want this really clean. And I'm just going to come off like so. And then here as well. Again, like butter. So you can have strips with clean edges, and any of this chalk, since it's a disappearing chalk, you can just take it over to the pressing table, press it, and the chalk will disappear. Now, let me go back to this here. This is extremely hot. It's extremely, I wouldn't say dangerous, but you could run the risk of burning something that you don't want to burn. So what I would say here, safety first. When you are finished, you unplug it. Now also, you can see there's some soot on the end. You want to take a knife every so often and scrape that off, because what that does is it builds up and it reduces the heat that goes to cut the fabric. So the stencil cutter, these you can get in any art supply store. I highly recommend you get one. So next, preparing the strips. Now this is where we address the size of the strips. The increment of measure that I learned from my friend Candace Kling is to use ribbon width as your increment of measure. That way you can scale this up or down depending on the width of the ribbon or strip of fabric. So this particular flower gets 6 ribbon widths. Now this strip is 3 inches, this strip is 2. So 3 inches times 6 is 18 inches, which you can see corresponds to the ruler. 2 inches times 6 is 12 inches. So again, the strip is 6 ribbon widths. Next comes marking. The first step, because we want the 6 equal sections to be distributed across the piece, what I will do is go over to the pressing table and press these in half, and I will bring them back to show you the results. Back from the pressing table, as you can see, we pressed a crease midway on both of these. Now, marking. I like to use the chalk, and especially if you're using an organza where the chalk actually will sift through, you can mark both at once. But having the crease is really going to enable me to mark accurately. So since this is where the increments are 1 ribbon width apart, we're going to measure up 3 inches and then measure up 3 inches. Now, if this is an opaque fabric, you're going to have to mark both sides, but the beauty of this, if with a sheer fabric, is you have shadows of the markings, so you can mark 2. Here we are. You can mark 2 at once. Now, from here, I'm going to go over to the pressing table and press creases on these marks, and I will bring back the results. So here I am back from the pressing table. Now, what I have done is I have threaded up a needle. I'm using contrasting thread, obviously, for demonstration purposes. So the object here, first, we want to sew these two, there we are. We want to sew these 2 edges together. There. And this is about 1/8 of an inch from the cut edges. Little short running stitch, doesn't have to be beautiful because it's going to be hidden in the final result. Okay, so let's just secure that thread. We're not cutting the thread, we're just anchoring this. Okay, so now this is what I call a W fold, for lack of a better way of putting it. So we're going to fold like this, then we're going to fold these two edges up. So you can call it a W. So it comes down, up, down, up. W or M, upside down W. And then the object here is to just whip stitch all these edges together. Step 1. So this is where we're at now. So our next step is to pick up this next edge and make another W-shaped fold. It's a little bit fiddly, but you'll get used to it. Another W-shaped fold, and then we just continue the thread along. And whip stitch these folded edges together. Okay, so let me show you the results here. And one more. Again, another W-shaped fold. More whip stitching. See, it's starting to look like something. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the rest of the folds and we'll end up back here, but I will do that off camera and I will bring you back the results. So I've worked along, as you can see, and I have the last crease before we join back up to where we started. And again, that last W-shaped fold. It gets a little bit trickier when the closer you get to the end here, because things start crowding a little bit, but not impossible. It goes back there. Okay. And there we go. Okay. And so now, this is where the magic starts to happen. So what we want to do is, there we go. We want to join up with the first one. And then secure your thread. So that's what it's going to look like from the back. Now, once you have this all sewn, there's what I call dressing the flower. What you want to do is give a little pull on each one of these petals so they kind of fill out, show as much of this fabric as you can. This is called dressing the flower. And so what you have here is the circle flower. This is what we created in the last step, which is the basic circular flower. But when I was doing research for this, I decided, well, what if we scale it up? So this is the result. Now, just to give you, this is my research, so you get to see what it looks like when I make research. So what you can see here, the strips are 12 inches wide, they're 45 inches long, divided into 8 units. Each unit is 3 1/4 inches. So as you can see, this means this is 11 1/4 inches long. So these are the numbers that I came up with. And so say if you wanted to make a cuff, if you wanted to make a cuff for a sleeve, or if you wanted to make a collar for a neckline, it's the same idea, just scaled up. So you can either have a teeny tiny little flower to embellish something with, or you can make something that's going to be a very stunning detail on a garment. That said, next I'm going to show you a variation on this flower. Now this is the variation that I spoke about a moment ago. It's rather nice. And I'm also going to show you some variations to the variation. For the variation, I have prepared another strip, 3 inches wide, 18 inches long, and I have pressed the creases into 6 different increments. Now what this is here, this is a template, and this is one of the beauties of using the stencil cutter with clear glass, is that you can make a cut. Let's zero in on this here. There we go. So you want to cut this before you make the flower. So there's no hard and fast rule here about shape. It's something of a zigzag, because what's going to happen is these are going to turn into the petals, as you've seen. And if it isn't exactly what you've drawn, don't sweat that. Because in nature isn't always perfect. Whenever possible, it's good to get the fabric as flat to the glass as you can, and you move fairly quickly. So I will go ahead, finish the others, I'll bring you back the results. Okay. So here, let me draw out a little bit. So you can see you have 2 petals that we're going to work with later. Now, let me thread up a needle so we can start sewing. Now that we have the strip cut with the petals, we proceed the same way we did for the basic flower. So it just doesn't hurt to show it again, because you may not have seen it. Let me zoom in a little bit here. You may not have seen it as easily in the dark purple. And secure. So now, again, it's the W fold. You fold it in half. You fold the two halves up. So it makes a W. And as before, you whip stitch all of these raw edges together. Okay, so from here, let me just take one more stitch here. From here, we pick up the next fold, and again, fold it into that W shape. And whip stitch. So what I will do is I will go off camera and work around and come back and meet you at this end here. Okay, here we are, ready to connect at the point where we started. I'm going to stitch a few stitches and secure this. Okay, so here we are. So now what we want to do is dress this. So you just fluff and separate everything. So here you have the variation. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of things you can do with this variation. Now, the first variation involves making a second one, but without the petals. Now, this is the 2-inch wide strip, 12 inches long. So the beauty of this is what you can do is you can sort of separate this open and drop this in. Like so. What you would do then is you would come into the back and you would whip stitch these together, and I will show you what that looks like. Now, I've worked ahead, and what you really need to know is the object is you're going to be sewing the middles of these petals together. You don't have to sew all the way around. You just want to catch it two or three times and trim your thread. So let me just show you. So So you can see there are 6 tacks because there are 6 petals. And so you have this nice small flower that nestles in to the larger one. The other variation is to make another flower exactly the same size. You can make it a different color, you can make it the same color, and like before, you would just come in here and drop the first one into the second one, and then you would come back here and sew those together, which I will show you in just a moment. As you can see here, since they're both the same size, you just line up each petal one on top of the other, and just one stitch to join them is sufficient. So you can see here, the 2 layers are joined together. And so here you have a rather pretty flower. So in conclusion, we made the circular flower, and you can see here it is worked in 2 different sizes. From there, we moved on to the petal flower. We have the 2 variations here. And then you see the range of what you can create with this particular technique. I hope you've enjoyed it.